Your first year on a generation ship is when everything hits you at once. You can't turn back to Earth anymore. Messages home take days to arrive. Gravity and sleep feel wrong. And even food and air are just machines that might fail. Thousands of stressed people are stuck under new rules no one has ever tested in deep space before. This is the year that decides whether you truly adapt to life on the ship, or you're one of the ones who can't. A trip to the International Space Station needs only a few kilometers per second of speed change, just enough to climb about 400 kilometers up, around 250 miles, and match orbits. If something goes wrong, a capsule can undock and be back in the atmosphere in a few hours. There is always an abort mode, always a way to point the nose down and come home. On a generation ship, that option does not exist. To reach just 1% of light speed, about 3,000 kilometers per second, around 1,860 miles per second, your engines must add an enormous amount of speed, far beyond anything flown so far. The mass of propellant you need to accelerate the whole ship to that speed leaves almost nothing left over for braking. Once the main burn is done and you reach cruise, the math is locked in, there is not enough delta left to cancel that velocity and reverse course. In the first days and weeks, people still talk like it's a long mission. They say things like, if the situation changes on Earth, maybe we can divert, maybe we can slow down. That's not how orbital mechanics works. By the end of year 1, you're already tens of billions of kilometers from Earth, tens of billions of miles, on a path that cannot be undone with the fuel you have. There is no rescue mission coming, because no ship built later can catch a vessel already coasting at thousands of kilometers per second. So you can't physically go back. At least you can still talk to people in close to real time, right? That belief dies in year 1 as well. On the ISS, a radio signal travels the roughly 400 kilometers to the ground in about 0.02 of a second. It feels instant. You speak mission control answers, like a normal call. When your ship is newly launched and still near the solar system, it's similar. Maybe a small delay, a few seconds, nothing that really changes how you talk. Keep moving. After about a year at 1% of light speed, you're around 1/100th of a light year away, roughly 95 billion kilometers, about 60 billion miles. Light now needs around 3.5 to 4 days to cross that distance one way. You send your family a message on Monday. They do not even receive it until later in the week, and their reply does not get back to you until the week after. Conversation rhythm breaks completely. You stop asking small questions, because the answer will arrive when the situation has changed. You stop sharing daily life, because by the time they watch your video, that day is old news for both of you. A simple "how are you" turns into a slow exchange spread over weeks. During that first year, as the light time delay stretches day by day, your link to Earth switches from a live relationship to something more like delayed broadcasts. If you can't go back, and you can't talk quickly, maybe Earth can at least keep sending you things. That is the next hard limit you run into. The ISS lives on resupply. Cargo ships bring up food, water, clothing, replacement parts, scientific equipment, even small comfort items. If you mispack or something breaks early, you add it to the manifest for the next launch. It is still a remote outpost, but it sits at the end of a very long, very reliable highway. Your generation ship is not on a highway, it is on a one-time escape trajectory. Once you are at cruise speed, there is no way to send a tanker or cargo pod that can accelerate up to 3,000 kilometers per second, match your velocity, and dock without using absurd amounts of propellant. In practice, you get 0 resupply runs. Every kilogram of cargo had to be chosen before launch, then boosted off Earth, then integrated into the ship. In the first year, you feel that directly. You go looking for a specific medicine that works best for you, and medical says, "We only stocked these alternatives." You ask engineering for a certain tool you liked using on Earth, and they tell you, "We standardized on a different system to save mass." You want some small luxury from home, and the answer is simply, "We didn't have the payload budget." There is no option to fix packing mistakes later. You are living inside the final version of the manifest. At the same time, you start to learn that humans are not well tuned for this kind of isolation and confinement, even at much smaller scales. We already have data from Antarctic winter overcruise. These are stations with maybe 60 to 200 people stuck together for around 9 months, cut off from evacuation by darkness and weather. Rates of depression rise, sleep patterns get worse, small conflicts grow into big ones, because there is nowhere else to go. The Mars 500 experiment sealed 6 people in a mock spacecraft for 520 days. They saw mood declines, rising tension, and a pattern people call third quarter syndrome, the drop in morale when the early novelty is gone and the end still feels far away. Now, take those effects, scale the crew up to a few hundred or a few thousand, extend the duration to the rest of your life, and add one more factor: you know you'll never step outside into open air again. Antarctic crews know a plane will eventually land. Mars 500 volunteers knew someone could open the hatch. You know this is it. The first year is exactly when the psychological load spikes. Launch itself is noisy and stressful, but also exciting. You train, you explore the ship, you make new friends, you send your first messages home. It still feels like you are between two worlds. Then the numbers catch up. Earth drops below naked eye visibility. The communication delay slips from minutes to hours to days. Some people back home start to move on with their lives, they reply less often, or their messages shift tone. Maybe you get the first news of a relative's serious illness, or even death, and you understand in a very direct way you will not attend any funeral ever. Psychologists use the term cognitive separation to describe the moment when your brain stops treating a place as your active home and starts treating it more like a story or a memory. For a generation ship crew member, that shift almost certainly happens in year 1. Before that point, you still feel like an Earth citizen on assignment. After it, you start to feel like something else, a person whose real home address is a rotating cylinder in deep space. Your passport, your old street, your favourite cafe, all stay frozen at the moment you left. Time on Earth keeps going without you, and your own present drifts away on a different timeline. That is why the first year hurts the most. It is when all these different kinds of separation, physical, communication, logistical, emotional, stack on top of each other for the first time. And just as that is happening, another layer of difficulty is about to start, because even your own body, the way you stand and walk and feel down, is going to stop behaving the way you have known since birth. When gravity itself changes and your inner ear starts lying to you, how does that first year feel then? How long could you stay sane if even the direction of down stopped making sense to your body? That starts in month 1, and it keeps hitting you all through the first year. Your whole life so far has been lived at about 1G, the pull you feel standing on Earth. Your inner ear, your muscles, your sense of balance are all tuned to that one value. On a generation ship, you probably don't have real gravity. You have spin gravity created by rotation. Maybe the ship designers picked something like 0.5G, roughly Mars gravity. Scientifically, that is a smart compromise. Light enough to be cheaper to create, heavy enough to keep your bones and muscles from collapsing too fast. For your body though, 0.5G is wrong. At first, every move you make is slightly off. You push off the floor and float higher than you meant to. You reach for a handhold and your arm swings too far. You sit down and almost bounce out of the seat. Your brain is still sending commands calibrated for Earth. We already see a weaker version of this in orbit. On the ISS, almost 2/3 of astronauts get space adaptation syndrome in the first days, which is basically motion sickness caused by the inner ear and the eyes disagreeing. In your case, you're not in zero gravity, but you are in weird gravity, a level no human has grown up in. Your first year is your whole body trying to rewrite decades of assumptions about weight, balance, and effort. And that's before we add the twist that your gravity might not just be weaker, it might be spinning under you all the time. If you live in a rotating ring, you're literally inside a physics experiment. Picture a ring maybe 250 meters in radius, around 820 feet, spinning a couple of times per minute to create that half-Earth pull at the rim. The floor pushes up on your feet, that feels like gravity. But because the whole habitat is rotating, you also get what's called the Coriolis effect. This shows up every time you move your head or change direction. You turn your head quickly, and the fluid in your inner ear wants to keep moving straight, while your skull is rotating with the ship. Your inner ear sends "we are tilting" or accelerating signals that don't match what your eyes see. You reach out your arm while you walk, and the path your hand takes curves in a way that feels wrong. NASA has tested this on Earth with spinning chairs and rotating rooms. At higher spin rates above about 4 revolutions per minute, many people get very sick very fast. At lower rates, closer to 2 revolutions per minute, most people can adapt, but it takes days or weeks of training. You don't get to try it for a week and go home. On the ship, this is now your permanent environment. So year 1 becomes the period where your nervous system has to accept a new rule. Down is not a straight line to the center of a planet anymore. Down is a direction created by rotation, and if you walk inward or outward or across the ring, the apparent pull and the way things move around you can shift in subtle but disturbing ways. You might wonder, can't we just train people for this before they ever launch? This is where the next problem appears. We don't actually know how to train for long-term artificial gravity. We can train fighter pilots and astronauts to survive short bursts of 9G with special suits and breathing techniques, but that is for seconds, not for years. We can fly parabolic aircraft that give you 20 or 30 seconds of reduced gravity at a time, enough for a quick experiment or a media shot of people floating. Apollo astronauts walked on the moon at about 1/6 of Earth's gravity, but only for a few days while full of adrenaline, not settling in for normal life. No one has ever lived for years at 0.5 G in a rotating system. There is no training center on Earth where you can rehearse showering, sleeping, running, and yes, using a toilet under those exact conditions for months. The plumbing alone behaves differently. Water does not fall in nice clean streams, it drifts and clings. In a spinning frame, even vomit doesn't fly in the direction you expect if somebody gets sick. That's not just gross, it's a real hygiene problem. So your first year on the ship is not just your body adapting, it's the crew as a whole figuring out basic procedures the hard way. How do you design staircases so people don't trip as they move between different radii? How do you place handrails so that a sudden dizzy spell doesn't turn into a headfirst fall into machinery? How loud do you let people move in shared spaces when half of them still get queasy if they turn their heads too fast? Underneath all of that is a deeper change. Your motor memory, the subconscious part of your brain that stores the how of every movement, is suddenly wrong. You've spent decades learning exactly how high to lift your foot to climb a step, how hard to swing your arm to throw keys to a friend, how fast to lean when you run so you don't fall. None of that lives in your thinking brain. It's all in reflex loops built at 1G. In altered gravity, especially in spin gravity, all those numbers are off. At 0.5G, if you push off a wall with the same forces on Earth, you'll go twice as fast. If you lean into a turn expecting Earth grip and Earth weight, you can slip out or hit a bulkhead. Catching a falling object becomes strange. It drops slower, but its sideways motion is affected by the rotation, so it doesn't fall along the path your eyes predict. The first year becomes a full-body reprogramming job. You are like a toddler again, but there is no soft carpet and no safe playpen. There are sharp metal edges, fragile equipment, high-voltage systems, and no big hospital a short ambulance ride away. Every stumble can be serious. Every misjudged jump is a potential injury your small medical team has to deal with, using limited supplies. We know from ISS data that balance and coordination are worst in the first weeks of a mission, then slowly climb back toward a new normal as the brain rewrites its expectations. When astronauts come back to Earth, they often stagger and grab handrails like they are drunk, because their nervous system has been tuned to weightlessness for months. Then it has to switch back. On a generation ship, you don't get that return reset. Year 1 is the peak mismatch between what your brain expects and what the ship provides. People will be most clumsy, most dizzy, most prone to motion sickness and minor accidents in this window. Over time, your brain will adjust. By year 2, the crew that is still healthy and active will be the group that handled the transition best. For them, the old 1G world will start to feel like the weird one, just a set of stories and videos from a place where everyone moves too heavy. This is why that first year is such a harsh filter. It is not just selection by attitude, it is selection by nervous system, by inner ear, by how fast your brain can rewrite its own control software without falling apart. But gravity tricks and motion sickness are only the front-end problems. Behind them, slower and more dangerous changes are starting in your bones, your muscles, your blood, and even your immune system. If your balance can fall apart this badly in months, what happens to the architecture of your skeleton when you live in strange gravity for years? You think you know what getting old feels like, slow, stretched over decades on Earth. But in deep space, parts of that aging get squeezed into your first year. Your skeleton is the first system to complain. On Earth, bones stay strong because gravity and muscle pull constantly load them. In microgravity, like on the ISS, that load almost vanishes and astronauts lose roughly 1 to 2% of bone mineral density per month in the weight-bearing bones, especially hips and spine. That's like forcing several years of osteoporosis into a single year, focused right where you need support the most. We fight that on the ISS with heavy resistive exercise, vitamin D, careful diet, and it still doesn't fully stop the loss. Even with today's best equipment, long stays show net bone thinning. Now move to your generation ship. You're not in zero gravity, you're in spin gravity, maybe 0.5 G. That should help, because your bones feel some load. But here's the key problem: we don't have long-term data at that gravity level. No one has lived for years at half-Earth gravity, so year 1 is the trial. The medical team sets up baseline scans early, then follows up every few months. Maybe they use ultrasound on the hip and heel, maybe onboard densitometry systems. They compare the numbers, and they see the trend, up, stable, or down. If the exercise plan works, you see only tiny losses. If it doesn't, people in their 20s and 30s start showing the same bone density as much older adults on Earth. And if your skeleton is already on strike this early, what do you think your muscles are doing? Muscle responds even faster than bone. Take away normal weight and effort, and it shrinks. On the ISS, if you don't work out strictly, you can lose up to 20% of muscle mass in just a few weeks, especially in your legs and back. That is why orbital astronauts are forced into around 2 hours a day of training, treadmills with harnesses, cycling machines, and resistive devices that simulate lifting weights. On your ship, the gym is not a lifestyle choice, it is survival hardware. You'll have rows of machines bolted into the structure, tuned for 0.5 G, maybe more, maybe less. The rules will be blunt: hit your daily target or you're not cleared for your shift. You might have quotas like 10 kilometers, about 6.2 miles, of treadmill every day, plus a full resistance circuit. That sounds manageable on paper, but layer it on top of work, stress, bad sleep, and social drama, and people start skipping sessions. Year 1 is where that resistance meets reality. Some crew will follow the program perfectly, others will cut corners, swipe their badge, sit on the machine, barely move. At first, the difference is invisible. Then the medical scans show who's paying. Thigh muscles thinner, grip strength dropping, back pain rising. You get your first minor injuries that wouldn't have happened on Earth. A simple misstep that tears a weak muscle. A small lift that throws out a fragile back. Once that data hits the crew, the tension ramps up. Do you crack down harder on enforcement, turn the gym into a monitored obligation, or do you accept that some people will age faster and break sooner? And while you argue about workouts, another set of changes is quietly building pressure, literally, inside your head. In lower gravity, fluids in your body don't pull in your legs as much. Blood and other fluids shift upward toward your chest, neck, and skull. Astronauts in orbit talk about puffy-faced chicken legs because their faces swell and their legs slim down. It looks funny in photos, but it links to something more serious: changes in the eyes and vision. On 6-month ISS missions, a number of astronauts develop what's now called Spaceflight-Associated Neuroocular Syndrome, or SANS. Doctors see flattening of the eyeball, swelling in the optic nerve, shifts in vision that can require glasses. The leading idea is that increased pressure in the head, from those fluid shifts, slowly reshapes delicate structures. On your ship, you're at weird gravity, not zero. Maybe that reduces the effect, maybe it just changes it. Nobody knows yet. So in year 1, medicine goes into paranoid mode. Regular eye tests, photos of your retinas, maybe portable brain and eye scans. They measure intracranial pressure indirectly, they monitor headaches, they ask about blurry vision, light sensitivity, balance issues. If too many people show changes, leadership faces an ugly decision. Do you lower the spin? Change the gravity level everyone lives at, with all the side effects that brings? Do you redesign work tasks so fewer people have to move quickly through the ring, turning their heads and stressing their system? You start to realize that the ship's gravity setting is not just a design number, it's a long-term bet on how much strain your brain and eyes can take. If a simple change in gravity can distort your bones, your muscles, and even your eyes, what is it doing to your immune system, the part that's supposed to protect you from everything else? Space has already shown it can mess with immunity. Studies of ISS crews have found that latent viruses, like herpes and the virus behind shingles, reactivate more often in orbit. These are infections your body had under control on Earth, suddenly waking up when stress, microgravity and radiation start pushing on your immune cells. Wounds can heal slower. White blood cells change behavior. Gene expression, the way your cells turn certain defenses on and off, shifts under the load. Your first year on a generation ship combines all of that, plus extras. New biome, because the microbes around you are not the same as back home. Chronic stress, because you know you will never return. Altered sleep, because ship day and ship night run on artificial lights and shift schedules. Background radiation, higher than on Earth, constantly nudging your cells. Colds might spread differently in a sealed atmosphere with strong air circulation. Maybe they rip through the whole ring in days. Maybe they have trouble moving because filters catch droplets more efficiently. No one is totally sure. The medical team will track every cough, every fever. They'll test blood for immune markers. They'll watch closely for odd infections, because in a closed ecosystem, a new bug doesn't just go away, it lives with you. And that brings up the last layer. It's not just your immune system that's adapting, it's the billions of microbes that live with you, inside and outside your body. Your gut microbiome, the community of bacteria and other organisms in your digestive system, reacts strongly to diet, stress, and environment. On Earth, change what you eat, move to another country, or go through a stressful period, and those microbial populations shift. ISS studies show that astronauts' gut bacteria change in orbit, sometimes tilting towards species linked with inflammation or altered metabolism. On a generation ship, your diet changes on day 1 and never really stops changing. You're eating closed-loop food. Hydroponic vegetables, maybe algae-based protein, carefully processed grains, less fresh variety, more repetition. You are stressed. You are living under constant machine noise and artificial light. Your microbiome will respond for better or worse. Beyond that, the ship itself develops its own biome, a whole ecosystem that doesn't care about your mission plan. Bacteria coat air filters and ducts. Fungi find footholds in damp corners of hydroponic foam. Microbes colonize grey-water pipes, waste processors, even the tiny scratches on metal handrails. Year 1 is when that hidden ecosystem explodes into complexity. Every human who touches a surface seeds it with skin bacteria. Every plant rack launches spores and cells into the circulation. Sensors will pick up unexpected films in water lines, unusual smells in some compartments, slight changes in air quality. Labs will swab surfaces, sequence DNA, and find out which species are thriving in your new world. Most of them will be harmless. Some will be useful, breaking down waste or stabilizing soil substitutes. But it only takes one strain that loved chip conditions a little too much, maybe resistant to your antibiotics, to become a major problem. A mold that ruins crop yields, a bacterium that forms biofilms in critical valves. Year 1 is where you either catch those early or you let them settle in as permanent residents. All of this, bones thinning, muscles shrinking, fluids shifting, immunity wobbling, microbes evolving, is happening while you are still relatively close to home, in cosmic terms. And it's all before you fully step into something even less forgiving, the invisible radiation field outside Earth's magnetic shield, where every day your DNA is getting peppered by particles moving near light speed. If your biology is already under this much stress in year 1, what happens when you add a constant drizzle of radiation on top? You already have bones thinning, muscles shrinking, and your immune system under stress. And all of that is happening before you fully feel the main thing deep space throws at you. Radiation you can't see, can't smell, and can't ever fully turn off. On Earth's surface, you are sitting under a shield you don't think about. The planet's magnetic field and thick atmosphere take most of the hit from cosmic rays and solar particles. What reaches ground level adds up to around 2 to 3 millisieverts per year for an average person, give or take, depending on altitude and latitude. That's your normal background, the radiation your cells are used to handling. Leave Earth's magnetosphere, and that umbrella disappears. Now you're flying through charged particles from the sun and high-energy cosmic rays from the galaxy, almost unfiltered. Measurements from deep space probes and from missions that have gone beyond low orbit suggest that in interplanetary space you might see something like 0.5 to 1 millisievert per day, depending on how active the sun is and how well your ship is shielded. That means you can get a whole year of Earth's surface dose in a few days to a couple of weeks. At first, nothing feels different. You don't glow, you don't feel heat. But at the microscopic level, particles are hitting your body every second, breaking chemical bonds, slicing through DNA. Your cells repair a lot of that damage, but not perfectly. The first year is when those numbers stop being abstract and turn into a running total next to your same in the medical database. Your dose is now a number you live with. So why not just build the hull thick enough that you don't have to care? The answer is mass. Good radiation shielding, especially against the more common lower energy particles, needs material that slows them down and spreads out their energy. Hydrogen-rich materials like water or plastics such as polyethylene are very effective, but they are heavy. If you want to wrap your living areas in the equivalent of about 20 centimeters of water, around 8 inches, that's roughly 20 kilograms of shielding per square meter of surface. Spread that over a big habitat, something with the volume of a town, and you're talking millions of kilograms of shielding mass. Every extra layer is more launch energy, more fuel, bigger structures to push. So ship designers cut deals. They don't try to shield every space equally. They cluster crew quarters, medical bays, and long-stay work areas deeper inside the structure, behind tanks of water, food stores, fuel, maybe even waste tanks, all used as radiation shields. Then they accept that some parts of the ship, outer maintenance corridors, certain equipment rooms, will be hotter zones, places you only visit when needed, for limited time. Year 1 is where you find out what that trade actually feels like. Does sleeping in the shielded core feel cramped and noisy? Are the safe zones too far from where people work, so they cut corners and hang out in higher dose areas just because it's convenient? Do people start informally ranking cabins by radiation level and fighting over the best ones? You find out very quickly how much discomfort your crew will tolerate to save a few millisieverts per year. And that's all background. On top of that steady drizzle, you have spikes, solar storms. The sun does not shine evenly. Sometimes it throws out big eruptions, solar flares, and coronal mass ejections that can blast a wave of high-energy particles through the inner solar system. These solar particle events can raise radiation levels hundreds of times above the usual background for hours or days. On the ISS, when a strong event is predicted, they can move into better shielded modules or rotate parts of the station to put more material between the crew and the incoming particles. Your generation ship can't dodge easily, but it will have dedicated storm shelters, compact compartments wrapped in thick walls of water, fuel, and other hydrogen-rich material. When the sun misbehaves, alarms will go off and the crew will have minutes to drop what they're doing and pack into those safe rooms. A big event can arrive in under an hour after it's seen on warning satellites near the sun, less time than a normal commute on Earth. In your first year, you will almost certainly ride out at least one serious solar storm. You'll be squeezed in with dozens of people, maybe hundreds in shifts, in a dim, noisy metal box, while Mission Control announces estimated dose rates and updated forecasts. You'll feel the ship vibrate, you'll hear pumps rerouting coolant, you'll sweat in your suit or blanket, and in the back of your mind, you'll know that even if the shelter works perfectly, every big event still adds a noticeable chunk to your lifetime dose. This is where the long-term math starts to get uncomfortable. Space agencies today set career radiation limits for astronauts in terms of extra cancer risk. The details vary by age, but ballpark numbers land in the range of a few hundred millisieverts up to maybe 1 sievert over a career. A round-trip Mars mission with current shielding might give you a few hundred millisieverts in about a year. On a generation ship, you're not gone for a year. You're gone for the rest of your life. Even with careful shielding design, safe zones and good storm shelter discipline, long-term crew might accumulate doses in the multiple sievert range over decades. That doesn't mean you drop dead, but it does mean your probability of certain cancers climbs. So in year 1, the medical team starts treating radiation the way a cardiologist treats blood pressure. You get a personal dose meter. You get regular briefings. Someone sits down with you, pulls up your graph and says, if we project this rate out, here's what your risk curve looks like at 60 or 70 years old. It's not a scare tactic, it's just the new version of talking about cholesterol, except you can't move to a different neighbourhood to fix it, and cancer is not the only concern. Radiation can hit more than just dividing cells. Animal experiments and some human data suggest that chronic exposure to high-energy cosmic rays can affect the brain, possibly leading to cognitive changes, slower thinking, or memory issues. There are hints of increased cardiovascular disease, damage to blood vessels and heart tissue, and higher rates of cataracts, clouding of the lenses in your eyes. The exact thresholds where these effects become serious in humans, especially over decades, are not well defined. So your first year becomes a massive medical study. Blood samples go to the lab to check DNA, damage markers, to see how well your repair systems are coping. Brain function tests, maybe simple reaction time games or memory quizzes, get repeated on a schedule to catch any subtle declines. Eye exams watch for early cataract formation. Heart and vessel checks look for changes in stiffness or inflammation. You're not just a passenger, you're data. Every scan helps future crews, but it also decides what kind of life you personally are going to have at 40, 50, 60 in this ship. And the hard truth is, no one can promise you exact answers yet. The first generation is both settler and test subject. Put all of this together and look at the timeline. In year 1, you lose Earth's shield, move into a radiation field that gives you a year of ground dose in days or weeks, discover how cramped your real safe zones are, survive your first solar storm drill or real hit, start watching your dose climb, and begin long-term monitoring for effects that might not fully show up for decades. And that is still only one of your single points of failure. You're relying on shielding you can't thicken later, on medical projections built from incomplete data, and on life support systems that now have to keep you alive while your cells are being slowly battered from inside and out. If even breathing is now tied to how well your machines handle a hostile environment, what happens when you remember that the air in your lungs is not a planet anymore, it's just another thin, limited system that can fail? How safe does air feel when you know exactly how many kilograms of it exist between you and vacuum? On Earth, you never think about that. On a generation ship, you will know that number by heart. Earth's atmosphere is staggeringly massive, on the order of billions of kilograms of gas wrapped around the planet. You can burn a whole forest or dump pollutants for years, and their system barely twitches at human scale. It's not good for climate, but you don't run out of oxygen this week. On the ship, that scale disappears. Take a big rotating habitat, maybe with 100,000 cubic meters of internal volume, roughly what you'd get if you hollowed out a medium skyscraper. At normal pressure, that's only about 120,000 kilograms of air, around 120 tons. That's all the breathable gas between your entire population and suffocation. You and everyone else are pulling oxygen out of that inventory with every breath, every second. You're adding carbon dioxide back in. The only reason that number doesn't steadily drain to zero is because machines are constantly stripping out CO2 and regenerating O2. Your atmosphere is no longer a planet-sized buffer, it's an engineering project. On Earth, you don't lie in bed at night thinking, I hope the atmosphere is still there in the morning. On the ship you will, at least in year one. Carbon dioxide is the first invisible warning sign. Your lungs don't just need enough oxygen, they need CO2 to stay at low levels. On the ISS, when the scrubbers have issues, CO2 levels can rise fast. Astronauts feel it as headaches, fatigue, trouble concentrating long before it gets anywhere near lethal. Just a small increase above normal pressures is enough to mess with how you feel. Modern spacecraft use chemical systems to pull CO2 out of the air. Materials like solid amine beds or lithium hydroxide cartridges. Those either need to be replaced once they're used up or regenerated in cycles using heat and vacuum. A generation ship can't rely on throwaway cartridges, so you get regenerative loops, maybe enhanced with algae tanks or other biological helpers. All of those systems have failure modes. Filters clog, algae overgrow and then crash, pumps seize. Sensors drift off calibration so the display says fine when the real number is rising. Your first year will almost certainly include what people will later just call a CO2 day. One morning, maybe the air feels a little stuffier. A few people complain of dull headaches. Someone checks the environmental panel and sees the numbers climbing slowly but clearly. You're still safe, but you can see the line trending in the wrong direction. Work stops. Teams swarm the scrubber racks, swapping valves, flushing lines, rebooting controllers. That's the day when everyone on board understands at the same time the air is not a constant. It is a variable that can go wrong on a timescale of hours. Water isn't much kinder. On Earth, if your town has a bad drought, you truck water in from somewhere else or tap a different aquifer. On the ISS, they already recycle 80 to 90% of their water, capturing humidity from breath and sweat, urine, and condensation, running it through filters and distillers until it is clean again. A generation ship has to do better. To be sustainable over decades, you want to push toward 99% recovery or higher. The math here hurts. At 95% efficiency, you lose 5% of your water each cycle. Repeat that a few hundred times and your total stock collapses. Even at 99%, the losses pile up eventually. Year one is when you tune that system under real use, not lab conditions. Filters will clog faster than the models predicted because humans shed skin and hair. Membranes will age in unexpected ways. Some materials will leach tiny amounts of contaminants that slowly build up in the loop. And at some point, probably early, you will drink a glass of water and be told, this has already cycled through hundreds of bladders, including yours. It will be sterile and safe, but the psychological shift is real. On Earth, water mostly moves through rocks, rivers, clouds and oceans before it gets back to you. On the ship, it moves through pipes, tanks, and other people. Oxygen itself is another layer of machinery. Plants and algae can help, but for reliability, you'll lean hard on chemistry. One core system is electrolysis, running an electric current through water to split it into hydrogen and oxygen. The oxygen gets dried, compressed, and fed back into the habitat. The hydrogen can be burned or used in loops like the Sabatier process, where you react it with CO2 to make methane and water, recovering both oxygen and some fuel. These are proven reactions used in different forms on the ISS and in industrial plants on Earth. But every step depends on gear that can fail. Electrolyzer stacks wear out. Catalysts get poisoned by tiny amounts of impurities. Valves stick. Gas sensors drift. On Earth, If your oxygen plant has a hiccup, the outside air covers for it until a maintenance crew rolls over. On the ship, if your main oxygen generation line stalls, the countdown to hypoxia is measured in hours. You have stored oxygen, you have backup units, but you feel every minute. Year 1 is when those systems move from testing and commissioning to this is now the beating heart of our species, and there is no external backup. Every small alarm becomes a drill. Every minor fault in an O2 line is treated like a fire. And that's before you meet the problems nobody predicted. We got a warning about that on Earth with Biosphere 2, a sealed habitat experiment in Arizona in the 1990s. The goal was to keep a small crew alive inside a closed ecosystem. They discovered that oxygen levels kept dropping, not mainly because the people were breathing it, but because the concrete structure was sucking up O2 through slow chemical reactions. They had to pump in outside air to keep everyone healthy. That was in a facility sitting on solid ground, with the option to open the door and bring in supplies. On your generation ship, there is no open the door. If some material, maybe a sealant or a plastic or an insulation foam, starts reacting with oxygen faster than expected or outgassing toxins into the air, you cannot vent it to the outside world, because the outside world is vacuum. Year 1 is when your own concrete problem shows up. Maybe a microbe in the water system eats a particular rubber at 5 times the expected rate, and suddenly your leak budget is blown. Maybe a metal alloy in a CO2 scrubber behaves differently at ship humidity than in lab tests and starts corroding. You only find those couplings when all the systems are running together, full time, with real humans loading them in the ways no simulation is brave enough to copy. Once you've seen air go out of spec, water barely make its targets, and oxygen generation flirt with alarms, your sense of security changes. Breathing is no longer an automatic background event. It's something you do because thousands of components and millions of lines of control software are all doing their jobs right now. And all of that is happening just to give you air and water good enough to live. Food is another full loop on top of that, with its own brutal math and failure modes. So if even a glass of water and a lungful of air now feel like fragile high-tech products, what happens to your mind when you realize every calorie you eat also comes from a system that can break, and the menu for your entire life might basically be locked in by year 1? How long would you keep eating normally if every single calorie on the ship had to be grown under LEDs and counted in advance? That pressure hits hard in year 1, when food stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like a math problem. Start with simple numbers. An adult needs around 8,800 kilojoules per day, about 2,100 kilocalories, just to stay stable. Multiply that by 1,000 people and you need about 2.1 million kilocalories every day. Over a year, that's roughly 700 million kilocalories. You're not loading that much food into storage as pre-packed bars, the mass would be ridiculous. You're flying a farm, so the ship runs high-yield hydroponics and maybe big bioreactors. Plants grow in nutrient films or aeroponic systems, roots in mist, under carefully tuned LED light. Lettuce can go from seed to harvest in about 30 to 40 days. Potatoes might take 70 to 120 days. Grains like wheat or rice push out a few kilograms per square meter per year, maybe 3 to 4 kilograms per square meter per year if you push them hard. Leafy greens can yield more mass because you cut and regrow. On paper, before launch, the numbers line up. You allocate area, light, water, nutrients, and you get a neat table that says, we can feed 1,000 people with this much rack space. Year 1 is when you find out if those neat tables survive contact with reality. Maybe yields are lower because some variety doesn't like ship conditions. Maybe you lose a whole rack to fungus. Suddenly your margin is thinner than you thought. Even if the calories add up, your brain runs into another problem. Boredom. This isn't just whining. Menu fatigue is a documented effect in submarines, Antarctic bases, and space missions. When the menu doesn't change much, people simply stop feeling like eating. They skip meals, pick at food, and overall intake drops, even if the food is technically fine. On the ISS, hot sauce is a favourite hit, because taste can dull in microgravity and strong spice cuts through the blandness. On the generation ship, your menu is constrained by what grows efficiently. You're going to see a lot of leafy greens, various tubers like potatoes and yams, perhaps soy or pea protein, maybe algal or bacterial protein grown in vats. Think of something between a very functional vegan diet and military rations. It will be safe, balanced on paper, and after a few months, painfully repetitive. Year 1 is when the novelty dies. At first, picking basil from a rack or tasting your first shipped tomato feels special, like a victory. By month 6, you're looking at the same tomato, the same stew, the same bread for the 100-somethingth time. Some people start over-salting, over-spicing, just to feel something different on their tongue. Others lose appetite, which collides badly with the bone and muscle loss you're already fighting. And calories and taste still aren't the full story. You need the tiny stuff too. Macronutrients, proteins, carbs, fats are easy to track. Micronutrients are harder. You need iron for blood, B vitamins for nerves, vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids, iodine, zinc, selenium, all in the right ranges. On the ISS, every meal pack is engineered and supplemented, and even then, they have to watch for deficiencies or imbalances. In a closed farming system, if your nutrient solution is slightly off, or your artificial soil is missing a trace mineral, you can grow plants that look fine and yield well but don't carry enough of some key nutrient. People eat normal portions and slowly drift into deficiency over months or years. The first year's harvests are your baseline experiment. You test everything: iron content of leafy greens, omega-3 levels in plant oils or algae, iodine in anything that substitutes for salt. If you miss a gap now, and you don't catch it, you could lock the whole population into a slow, multi-year slide towards some deficiency disease. Fixing that later, with no easy resupply from Earth, means re-engineering your whole crop mix and supplement system mid-flight. And remember, your farm is under perfect weather, but not perfect safety. Controlled environment agriculture sounds simple. No storms, no pests, no seasons. But every control system you add is another way to fail. LED arrays can burn out early or drift in spectrum. If the colour balance shifts, plants might grow slower or change nutrient uptake. Pumps and valves move nutrient solution. If one fails, you can kill a whole rack of plants in hours. On Earth, if a greenhouse has a disaster, you truck in food from another region. On the ship, there is no other region. Year 1 is when you learn which parts of your farming system are fragile. Maybe a certain pump model has a hidden manufacturing flaw and keeps breaking. Maybe one plant variety spreads root rot faster than expected. You won't find that in a small ground test. You find it when one broken valve kills 10% of your vegetable output for a month, and you suddenly have to tighten rations. You start to see food not as the kitchen's problem, but as a live shipwide risk. Maintaining salad on the menu turns into maintaining civilization. Then there's the social bomb sitting inside all of this. Food is culture. On Earth, people bring their recipes and spices when they move. Immigrant communities use food to stay connected to home. On the ship, you launch with people from different countries and traditions, but you don't launch with all their ingredients. That famous spice mix that makes a dish feel like home. If the plants behind those spices don't grow efficiently in hydroponic racks, they may not be on board at all. If they are, their use might be tightly rationed. Year 1 is one long argument about what gets space in the seed bank and the grow racks. Do you use precious area to grow chilies and herbs, or do you plant more calorie-dense staples? Does one group's comfort food get priority over another's because it yields slightly better? Do you allow small personal garden patches, or is every square centimetre of growing area under central control? The physics of photons, nutrients and rack space suddenly decides which childhood dishes survive and which disappear. People feel that loss every time they walk through the farm modules and see rows of efficient, optimized crops instead of the variety they remember. So now line it all up. In year 1, you discover whether your calorie math actually feeds everyone. You watch menu fatigue drag down appetites. You scramble to close micronutrient gaps. You fight off early farm failures, and you argue over which pieces of culture are worth growing under hard constraints. Every bowl of soup is now the output of a complex, fragile machine made of biology, and plumbing. And all this is happening while your body clock is also under attack. Eating on schedule only helps if your sense of morning and night mean anything. What happens when the sun is gone, your sky is just LED panels, and your day length is whatever the shift planner says it is? How much more fragile do all these systems look when even your sleep, your hormones, and your basic sense of time start drifting in that first year? How well do you function if your body thinks it's 3 a.m. while the ship clock says start of shift? On a generation ship, that mismatch isn't a one-off bad night. It's the default risk in year one. Your body runs on a built-in rhythm that's roughly 24 hours long. This circadian clock is tuned mainly by light. On Earth, sunrise blasts you with bright blue-rich light, easily 10,000 to 30,000 lux if you step outside. Normal indoor lighting is weak by comparison, a few hundred lux. Your brain uses that hard contrast between bright morning and dark night to figure out when to wake up, when to release hormones, when to repair tissue. In orbit on the ISS, the sun rises every 90 minutes as the station circles Earth, which completely breaks your natural sense of the day. To fix that, they shut the windows most of the time and run an artificial schedule with lights on and off at set hours. It's a hack, but it works well enough for months. On your generation ship, there are no real sunrises at all. Outside is black, always. Every morning and evening comes from LEDs on walls and ceilings. Some control system decides when they go bright, when they go dim, what colour they are. That software is now your sun. Year one becomes a tug of war between thousands of human clocks and a few lines of code. The planners pick a standard ship day, maybe 24 hours to stay close to Earth, maybe slightly different to match power cycles. The lighting system ramps up blue-enriched light at morning, tones it down at night. But people aren't machines. Some are natural night owls, some are early birds, some are stressed and can't sleep even in the best conditions. You start to see gaps. People yawn through morning briefings. Others lie awake through night, tired but wired, because their brain isn't buying the light pattern yet. That's when sleep starts falling apart. Closed habitats already show this. ISS astronauts often sleep less than 7 hours per night and report more insomnia, even with careful schedules. Antarctic crews in winter see broken sleep, more waking up in the middle of the night, more weird dreams. Noise doesn't help. Your ship is full of pumps, blowers, fans, coolant lines, people walking in corridors, doors cycling. Every hallway is HVAC, every wall hums. So in year one, people start doing DIY sleep engineering. Eye masks show up everywhere to block out stray light from corridor panels and status LEDs. Cheap foam earplugs become prized items. Some groups negotiate unofficial quiet hours, where they try not to slam hatches or run loud equipment near sleeping areas, even if the formal schedule doesn't demand it. Others start quietly hoarding melatonin or other sleep aids from the medical stock, to knock themselves out when the noise and stress stack up. You learn fast that getting 8 decent hours of sleep is not just about discipline. It's about soundproofing, airflow paths, light leaks, shift overlaps, alarm policies. Sleep becomes an engineering problem, and your first year is when the flaws in that design show up as real people making real mistakes because they're tired. Now drop this on top. The ship never stops. Life support runs 24/7, navigation monitors never shut down. Hydroponic systems, bioreactors, critical maintenance, all need human oversight across the whole cycle. That means shifts. Maybe you run 3 main 8-hour blocks, maybe a more complex rolling pattern to spread out night duty. However you slice it, some people are going to be scheduled to work when their brain really wants to sleep. On Earth, we already know night shifts increase fatigue and errors. Airline and hospital data show more mistakes in the early morning hours. The only thing helping is that there's still a real dawn eventually, a strong natural cue to drag you back into sync. On the ship, there is no outside light to pull on you. If you're stuck on night shift for months, your body might push back hard. Some people never adapt fully. They feel jet-lagged all the time, slow, irritable, foggy. That is not what you want from the person watching the oxygen generators or the reactor. Year one is where the nice clean shift chart from mission planning collides with this reality. You find out who cannot handle certain rotations, you log near misses, small accidents, and you trace them back to fatigue. You get your first real argument between operations and medical, we need this coverage, versus these people are not safe on this pattern. We already know that strong blue-enriched light in the morning can push your circadian clock earlier, helping you wake up. Warmer, dimmer light in the evening protects melatonin, the hormone that helps you fall asleep. Space agencies already test tunable LED systems on the ISS, shifting colour over the day to support crew rhythms. On your ship, the whole civilization is one big lighting experiment. Corridor lights, cabin lights, farm lights leaking through windows, all of it combines into a 24-hour pattern your brains are trying to read. In year 1, you'll trial different settings. Maybe you start with a bright Earth-like day, then dial it down after a few months because too many people complain of headaches. Maybe you cut blue content aggressively in night hours to try to help sleep, and then find that night shift workers get dangerously drowsy. You will have data, actigraphy from wristbands, mood surveys, performance metrics on routine tasks. You will watch to see if one lighting regime gives you fewer errors and fewer depressive symptoms than another. But while you're collecting that data, real people are living through it in real time, feeling like they're permanently a few time zones off. Underneath all this is a strange mental effect. Time itself starts to feel less solid. On a planet, days are obvious. The sun rises, the sun sets. Even if you stay indoors, you notice the world outside changing. Weeks and weekends tie to that pattern, and so do holidays, farming cycles, school terms. On the ship, the only reason Tuesday exists is because the calendar says so. There is no sunrise to tell your bones that this is a new day. The view out any window is mostly the same star field, very slowly shifting over months and years. In the Mars 500 isolation study, even with clocks and schedules, some subjects drifted and lost strong awareness of which day it was. Tasks blurred together. In your first year, you'll feel a weird tension about dates. Holidays, national days, launch anniversaries, birthdays, all hit harder because they are some of the last remaining links to Earth time. At the same time, they feel off because the environment around you doesn't change. Christmas on a ship looks like any other artificial light day with a different menu and maybe some decorations. People will react in different ways. Some will cling to the calendar, celebrate every Earth holiday in full, demand strict observance of weekends. Others will drift, stop caring what the day is, live by shift roster alone. Arguments will pop up over scheduling big events. Ship midnight for some crews is ship noon for others. By the end of year 1, you start to understand something very uncomfortable. Your deep sense of morning or evening, this week, next month, is mostly a software layer your brain built on top of sunlight and social habits. Strip those away, and you have to rebuild it with LEDs and spreadsheets. And that reconstruction is happening while you are locked in with the same few hundred or few thousand people, with nowhere to go when tempers flare, when relationships break, when leadership stumbles. If time itself feels slippery, and nobody can walk away to cool down, what does that do to a community that has to survive together for generations? How stable do you stay when you're stuck in a small town that you can never leave, with people you barely know, and no one new ever walks in the door? That's your social reality in year 1. Humans seem to top out at around 150 stable relationships, give or take. That's Dunbar's number, the rough limit on how many people you can actually know, track, and care about in detail. Your ship might have 1,000 people, maybe 5,000, maybe more. That's small city scale, but packed into a set of cylinders and rings where every corridor brings you back to the same faces. We already see problems at much smaller scales. Antarctic stations with 50 to 100 winter over staff get strong cliques, bitter arguments, and what people call winter over syndrome, apathy, irritability, low mood. There is no fresh social input and everyone knows everyone else's stories by month 6. On the generation ship, year 1 is when those patterns start, but with a twist. In the first weeks, everyone is technically a stranger. You're still learning names, trying to remember who works where, grabbing first impressions. By the end of that first year, your Dunbar limit is already full, and you're still surrounded by thousands of people you'll never know properly. You get the worst of both worlds. not enough distance, not enough anonymity, and not enough true intimacy outside a small circle. Now think about conflict in that setup because you cannot walk away from it. On Earth, if you hate your co-workers, you quit, you transfer, you move city. If you have a bad breakup, you can switch friend groups or just avoid certain bars and cafes. Physical space lets you shrink, redraw, or abandon social networks. On the ship, your maximum distance from someone is maybe a few hundred meters, a couple of decks, half a city block. You will pass them in corridors, see them in the gym, hear their voice in meetings. There is no new job across town because town is the whole universe for you now. Submarine studies already show how small tensions can dominate people's thoughts on long patrols. A minor habit, a way someone chews, the sound of their laugh, can become unbearable when there's no escape. In your first year, every breakup, every friendship rupture, every argument with a supervisor lives in a social graph that never resets. Word travels because it has nowhere else to go. That makes gossip more than just entertainment, it makes it infrastructure. In a closed community, people use informal reputation to decide who they can rely on. Who really knows how to fix air filters, even off the book? Who always volunteers for extra cleaning when things go bad? Who cuts corners on inspections? Who vanishes during emergencies? Who drinks too much? Who leaks private messages? Anthropologists studying small villages and old naval ships have seen this before. Gossip acts like a live risk map. It flags people as safe, dangerous, useful, or flaky. On your generation ship, the same thing happens through face-to-face talk, plus internal social networks, messaging apps, and rumour channels. Year 1 is when the first serious reputations harden. Someone blows a procedure in life support, or someone keeps calm and saves a situation. Someone cheats on shift logs or hoards meds. These stories get told, retold, and fixed in people's minds. Once that happens, it is very hard to reset. In a world with no inflow of new people, your mistakes can stay attached to your name for the rest of your life. And relationships themselves are not just private business anymore. They are tied directly to whether the ship can support your population. In a generation ship, population size is not optional. Life support can only handle so many mouths, and you need enough young people to keep the system running in the future. That means someone, somewhere, is tracking birth rates, death rates, age structure, and genetic diversity. Imagine being in your 20s, starting a serious relationship, and learning that if you want a child, you need approval from a committee that checks capacity forecasts and genetic databases. They're not just asking, are you good parents? They're asking, do we have enough nitrogen for this kid's lifetime? Year 1 is when that hits home. People who thought they were just moving to a new frontier find out they're also part of a managed program. Some will accept it as necessary. Others will see it as control, as an attack on basic freedom. That tension doesn't stay theoretical. It shows up in secret relationships, fights, and arguments about who gets to decide. On top of all this, you have culture stacked in layers. You didn't launch a ship of clones. You launched a mix of languages, habits, music tastes, ideas about noise and cleanliness. On Earth, groups can separate geographically. Neighbourhoods form, communities cluster. If you don't like how someone lives, you often just live somewhere else. On the ship, all neighbourhoods share the same air, the same walls, the same narrow spaces. There is no other valley for a breakaway group to go start their own thing. Disagreements over dress or diet can't be softened by distance. Year 1 is when the first flashpoints appear. You start seeing which conflicts are about deep principles and which are about simple overcrowding and frustration. Some are fixable with better scheduling and better soundproofing. Others are deeper, about whose identity gets priority when physics and logistics say you can't satisfy everyone. Put it all together. In the first year, you have a population size above what any one person can track, trapped in volumes too small to hide in, building permanent reputations in a gossip network that never flushes, living under demographic rules that reach into their bedrooms while trying to maintain multiple cultures without physical separation. That's already volatile. Now, add power to the mix. When people start to feel trapped, judged, and managed, they start asking harder questions about who wrote the rules, who enforces them, and what happens if you refuse. On a ship with no exit door and no higher court to appeal to, what does the first real challenge to authority look like? And how close does it come to a mutiny in that first year? How do laws work when there is no outside world to enforce them, and no way to walk away if you think they're unfair? On a generation ship that stops being theory very fast, and year one is when it turns real. Before launch, people will argue over legal frameworks. Are you under the flag of the launch nation, a coalition of states, or a brand new charter written just for the ship? Earth's maritime law grew from centuries of shipwrecks, disputes and court cases. Space law is a few treaties and some national regulations. Interstellar law does not exist at all. On day one, nobody cares. Everyone is busy with checklists, docking, spin-up, calibration. Then something happens that makes it urgent. Someone sabotages a system, maybe as a protest. Someone steals or hoards critical meds. Someone assaults another crew member in a way that clearly crosses every line. Suddenly it's not a policy document, it's what do we do with this person today? You need to answer questions fast. Who has the right to investigate? Who decides guilt? What counts as evidence? What punishments are allowed and who signs off on them? You don't have time to wait for legal scholars on Earth to send you a memo months later. The ship has to act. And people are watching closely to see if that action feels like justice or like raw power. That's where the second problem kicks in. On this ship, there is no above the people in charge. On your ship, the top authority, whether that's a captain, an elected council, or some algorithmic governance system, is the highest level within a light year in any direction. If they make a decision you hate, you can't appeal to some higher court and expect an answer before you retire. History gives some hints about how that plays out. Early polar expeditions, whaling ships, and first-wave colonies often had a single clear leader. When a crisis hit, the crew decided, sometimes quietly, whether that leader was legitimate. If people believed the leader was fair and competent, they followed even harsh orders. If they didn't, discipline broke fast, sometimes into outright mutiny. Year one on a generation ship is exactly that test. The first big incident, the first time leadership has to punish someone, ration a resource, or override complaints for the good of the mission, is when everyone silently decides, do I accept these people as my government or not? If too many answer no, you don't see it immediately as open rebellion. You see it as something subtler, people obeying slower, cutting corners, ignoring rules when they think they can get away with it. At the same time, the ship itself is wired like a surveillance dream, or a nightmare, depending on your point of view. From an engineering angle, more sensors are always better. Cameras let you spot leaks. Mics can auto-detect alarms and shouts for help. Biosensors and RFID tags let you track where people are, who's in which pressure zone, who entered a restricted lab, who hasn't moved in hours and might be unconscious. Submarines and the ISS already log almost everything because in closed environments surprises are dangerous. Your generation ship has far more computing power and storage than any current vessel. It can, in principle, track every door you open, every machine you use, your heart rate, maybe even your sleep patterns and bathroom trips, all in the name of safety and optimization. But from a human perspective, that level of tracking feels like living in a panopticon. In the first year, you will have your first privacy scandal. Maybe someone in security pulls private camera footage to settle a personal grudge. Maybe an admin leaks medical data. Maybe a group of crew members figures out how to spoof their RFID tags and disappear from the official logs for a few hours to get some unmonitored time. When that happens, the argument begins. How much surveillance is acceptable in tin can, where everyone's life depends on catching problems early, and how much makes normal life impossible? The line you draw in year one about what can be monitored, logged and reviewed will be very hard to move later, because every change will look like either a safety risk or a power grab. Overlay that with work and you get the next stress test. What does refusing look like when every job is essential? On Earth, workers can strike. They can slow down, walk out, picket. Even in critical sectors, there's often at least some backup. Other regions, stored reserves. In Antarctica, there have been cases where staff basically refused certain tasks until conditions improved. The world didn't end, because the larger system could absorb the shock. On a generation ship, maintenance, farming, waste processing, medical, navigation all sit under the label essential. If hydroponics techs walk off the job for a week, crops die. If life support engineers stop, air quality slides in hours or days. That doesn't mean people won't push back, it just means the cost is brutal. Year 1 is when you find out if there is any real, peaceful way to resolve serious grievances. Maybe there's a mediation council that actually has teeth. Maybe work groups can vote to pause non-critical tasks and force negotiations without killing the ship. Or maybe the first attempt at collective resistance shows up as something like a slowdown in one department, and leadership responds with harsh penalties, calling it sabotage. That's how you get a proto-mutiny. Not necessarily people storming the bridge with tools, but a visible block of crew saying out loud or by action, "We don't trust the way you're running this place." While the rest of the ship watches and chooses sides, every response to that, big or small, becomes precedent. Law is not just rules on paper, it's a history of decisions. The first time you confine someone to quarters for a month or move them to a less desirable, noisier, higher radiation zone as punishment, or cut their access to shared amenities, you're teaching everyone what justice looks like here. The first time you permanently remove someone from a critical role, or even talk about freezing embryos, genetic samples, or long-term privileges as sanctions, you're writing the outer limits of acceptable punishment. Later generations will look back at those year 1 choices the way countries look back at founding court cases or revolution moments. They'll say, "This is when we decided that hoarding meds is treated like this," or "This is when we decided leadership can or cannot override medical privacy in emergencies." Those stories will be repeated in classes, in debates, in arguments at dinner. And remember, all of this is happening while the hardware of the ship is still in its own teething phase, with pumps failing, leaks appearing, filters clogging. You're trying to build fair, trusted power structures in the middle of a constant low-level engineering emergency. So far, you've seen how people clash with each other and with authority inside a closed steel world. But underneath is something even less forgiving. The ship itself, a machine with millions of components, each with a chance to fail, each now days, months, or years away from any external help. When the first serious mechanical chain reaction begins, and you realize how thin your margin really is, how does that change every argument about power, law, and who gets to make decisions? How safe would you feel if you knew that on any random day, something somewhere on the ship is guaranteed to break? That's not drama, that's just how big, complex machines behave, and year 1 is when you stop thinking of the ship as a sleek vehicle and start seeing it as a giant, fragile life support machine wrapped in metal. Every component on board has a mean time between failures, an MTBF. It might be 10,000 hours for a basic pump, maybe 100,000 hours for a valve, maybe 1,000,000 hours for some high-end electronics. Those sound like big numbers until you multiply them across thousands or millions of parts. A modern airliner already has millions of components, and even with careful maintenance, something minor fails on almost every flight. Your generation ship is far larger and far more complex than an airliner, stretched over kilometers instead of tens of meters. On Earth, when something fails, you land, swap the part, call a technician, and order new stock. In orbit around Earth, you still have the option of resupply. In deep space, you are the technician, and you can never order more from outside. So in year 1, the predicted charts from the designers, all those careful MTBF curves collide with what actually happens when real humans use the systems every day. Maybe one family of pressure sensors fails twice as often as planned in the humid, slightly dusty air of the farm ring. Maybe a particular controller overheats in a cramped cabinet. Each unexpected failure eats a spare, takes technician time, and chips away at your safety margin. You start keeping a mental list of problem children systems that always seem to be in some warning state. You might think, fine, just bring lots of spares, but every kilogram of spares is a kilogram you didn't use for food, shielding, or people. Even with advanced manufacturing on board, including 3D printers, you cannot make everything from scratch. You still need raw feedstock, and some parts like precision bearings, high-grade alloys, and complex microelectronics need specialized factories that you did not launch with you. Designers run probability models before launch. We expect this model of pump to fail once every few years. We'll fly 3 spares. The chance of using them all is tiny. Year 1 is when you find out which assumptions were wrong. You might have one pump line that, on paper, almost never fails, but in practice locks up 4 times in 6 months because of some unforeseen vibration pattern or impurity in the fluid. Suddenly, the low-risk part has burned through your entire spare stack. You can redesign around some of this. You can change operating conditions, adjust flows, tweak software. You can use printers to crank out crude replacement housings or brackets, but you can't print a new high-precision sensor array without the right materials and tools. So you start to feel a creeping pressure. How many more surprises like this are hiding in the system? And how many spares do you really have for each? And all of that is just internal hardware. The outside universe is also trying to poke holes in you. Space is not empty. It's full of dust, grains, and small rocks moving at tens of kilometers per second, tens of thousands of miles per hour. Even a grain 1 millimeter across, about the size of a coarse sand grain, hitting at 20 kilometers per second, roughly 45,000 miles per hour, carries kinetic energy in the same ballpark as a rifle bullet. If that hits bare metal, it doesn't just dent, it can punch through. Your hull will not be bare metal. It will have multi-layer Whipple shielding, outer plates designed to break up incoming particles and spread the damage. That works well for many hits, but not perfectly. The ISS has already seen small leaks. In 2018, a hole only around 2 millimeters across caused a slow air leak that had to be found and patched. Your first year will probably give you your first hull leak. It might be tiny, just enough to show up as a slow drop in pressure over hours or days. Alarms trip in the control room. Pressure trend graphs start getting a lot more attention. Teams go module by module, closing hatches, listening for the faint hiss of escaping air, using ultrasound detectors or foam sprayers to try to find the defect. Even if the leak is minor and quickly patched, the psychological effect is strong. You were thinking about pumps and valves, internal hardware. Now you have to accept that the vacuum outside is an active threat, and that your entire hull is, in some places, one unlucky pebble away from trouble. Inside, another old enemy behaves in new ways: fire. We tend to think space is metal and plastic. What burns? The answer is a lot of it, if you are not careful. Cables, plastics, fabrics, some types of insulation, all can catch. In microgravity, flames don't look like they do on Earth. Without normal convection, hot gases don't rise in the same way. Fires form more spherical shapes, and combustion can continue at lower oxygen levels than you'd expect. In spin gravity, you'll mostly get normal-looking flames in the main living areas, but in maintenance shafts or equipment bays where local flow patterns are strange, you can still get odd behaviour. Spacecraft fire tests have shown that materials that seem safe on Earth can ignite more easily in these conditions. A small electrical fault, a loose wire, or overheated electronics board can light insulation or cable bundles. In a closed module, toxic smoke and heat can build up in minutes. You will drill for this. In year 1, there will be multiple full-ship fire drills, alarms blaring, doors cycling, people rushing to muster points wearing emergency masks. And there will almost certainly be at least one real small fire. A melted circuit, a scorched panel, a piece of equipment smoking in a rack. The first time that happens, you will smell it a long time after the air is clean again, because you now know exactly how fast one bad spark could have filled a corridor with poison. Fire in a sealed ship is not just damage, it's an existential threat. The procedures around it will harden quickly, and you will likely end up with rules that feel harsh, like instant shutdown of equipment for minor issues, because nobody wants to test how big a fire can get before it outruns your response. Underneath all these specific dangers is a more general problem. You don't yet know how this particular ship fails. Any new complex system has a learning curve. With new aircraft designs, we see higher incident rates early on, then improvements as operators learn the weak points, adjust maintenance schedules and update training. They learn which warning lights are noisy, which subsystems tend to fail together, where the gotcha interactions live. Your generation ship is the first of its line. There is no long history of fleet data to lean on. Year 1 is your teething phase, but your test environment is interstellar space, not a controlled runway. Early on, alarms will go off frequently. You'll learn that some combinations of alarms almost always mean something serious, while others are just artifacts of sensor noise. You'll discover that a blockage in one waistline always shows up as a small pressure quirk 2 modules away, or that a certain temperature spike in one rack predicts a later failure in another. The engineering teams will spend much of Year 1 building an internal map of this failure choreography. Which systems drag others down when they go, which ones are true single points of failure, and which ones can fail quietly for a while without killing you. They'll adjust checklists, reorder inspections, change which spare parts get priority. But while they're learning, you are living with higher risk. This is the period when the odds of a weird multi-step failure are highest, simply because you haven't seen it before. It's when a bad reading gets dismissed as probably a sensor glitch, when it's actually the first hint of a real problem, or the other way around, when a harmless quirk triggers a full emergency response because nobody knows yet which is which. And all of that constant small failures, rare scary ones, leaks, fires, and unknown chain reactions is happening while the ship is still relatively slow by interstellar standards. Once you are fully at cruise speed, every grain of dust ahead of you carries enough energy to hurt you badly. If the machine is already this delicate when you're just getting started, what happens when you slam it through a thin fog of high-speed debris for years, and your only options are to trust the navigation algorithms, the shields, and the same fallible humans who are already stretched fighting internal problems? How safe do you feel when you realise that at cruise, you can cross planetary distances before you even finish a sentence, but you can't stop quickly if something is in the way? That's navigation at a tiny fraction of light speed. At around 1% of light speed, your ship is moving at about 3,000 kilometers per second, roughly 1,860 miles per second. In 1 second, you cover about the distance from New York to Los Angeles. In a few minutes, you've gone farther than the distance from Earth to the Moon. At that pace, an old huge distance like Earth to Mars, 8 million kilometers, about 50 million miles, is just a short hop in terms of time. But all that speed means enormous kinetic energy. Even a small object, something the size of a pebble or a grain of sand, carries enough punch at those speeds to do serious damage. A piece of dust that would be nothing on Earth becomes shrapnel in deep space. That's your basic problem. You are now a bullet moving through a thin but not empty target. You can't just point headlights out front and look where you're going. Light takes time to travel. By the time a reflected beam comes back from something ahead, you've already moved a long way. Radar and LiDAR have similar range and response limits. At these speeds, anything your short-range sensors see is basically already on top of you. So navigation leans hard on maps and models. Before launch, astronomers survey your path with big telescopes and radio arrays. They measure gas and dust density in the interstellar medium, the stuff between stars. On average, it's incredibly thin, maybe about 1 atom per cubic centimetre, far emptier than any vacuum we can easily make on Earth. But it's not uniform. There are clouds, filaments, little clumps. Your ship will have forward-looking instruments, wide-field cameras, long baseline radar or LiDAR, maybe particle detectors to taste what you're flying through. They feed that into models predicting how many particles per cubic meter you should hit and how big they might be. Year 1 is the first check. Does reality match the model? As you accelerate and settle into cruise, you count actual impacts on the forward shield, you measure dust density, you watch how quickly your sensors register small hits. If you're flying through a bit of space that's denser than expected, the numbers will drift up. Suddenly, what was a comfortable safety margin on paper starts to look thin. That's where your shields and sacrificial layers earn their keep. To stay alive, you probably have a heavy forward shield, maybe a thick slab of metal, ceramics, or layered composites, taking the direct hit from everything in front. On top of that, there might be a cloud of particles or plasma projected ahead of the ship, a kind of artificial fog made of dust or ionized gas. Incoming debris hits that cloud first, breaks apart, slows down a bit, then hits the main shield less violently. All of that uses resources. Maintaining a dust or plasma cloud costs power and reaction mass, some of your limited supply of stuff you can throw away. Every real impact on the solid shield erodes it slightly, chips material off, heats it, damages its structure. You will install sensors inside and behind the shield to track how much thickness you've lost, how many hits of what energy you're taking. In year 1, engineers start logging those impacts and extrapolating. If the current erosion rate continues, does the shield last 100 years, 200 years, or only 30? If the answer comes back shorter than planned, the entire mission's risk profile changes. You might have to increase your protective cloud, which costs more mass. You might need to accept higher risk later, or adjust course toward a region of space with lower predicted density if one exists on your reachable options. Changing course is not free. Every time you adjust direction, you pay in delta V, that change in speed that costs propellant or energy. On interplanetary missions inside a solar system, planners can schedule small correction burns months or years in advance, nudging the path with tiny pushes. On your ship, once you're at high speed, a meaningful lateral change is expensive. If your early measurements say you're flying into a dense region than expected, or past some unmodelled hazard, you face a hard question in year 1. Do you spend some of your precious manoeuvre budget now to angle slightly away? Or do you accept more hits later to save fuel? Remember, most of your fuel is already spoken for, just to speed up and slow down over the whole interstellar trip. Year 1 is really your last good window to commit to big trajectory changes. Closer to home, you still have more flexibility. Deeper into the void, your fuel margin for optional burns shrinks. Navigators will be running worst-case math all the time. If we see a bad region this far ahead, can we still move around it? Or will we just have to plough through and hope? And all of this rests on systems nobody can fully hold in their head anymore. Modern airliners already spend most of their time on autopilot, with computers flying smoother and more efficiently than humans. Your generation ship takes that dependence to the extreme. Navigation uses star trackers that watch the sky and lock you to precise orientations, gyroscopes and inertial measurement units that detect tiny rotations, accelerometers that feel changes in speed, and complex algorithms that blend all that data. Those algorithms might include relativistic corrections, dynamic models of dust fields, active control of shields and sacrificial clouds, micro adjustments to attitude to spread wear evenly. No single human can understand every line of that code in detail. You can understand pieces, but not the whole. In year 1, you will almost certainly get your first disagreement between what the navigation computers say and what some humans think they see. Maybe a star tracker briefly glitches, showing a wrong attitude and suggesting a course deviation. Maybe a set of impact sensors reports a sudden spike that looks like you hit a dense clump, but external cameras show nothing obvious. The automated system might recommend a burn or a shield reconfiguration based on its internal model. Now the question becomes, who do you trust? The black box autopilot that is too complex to fully audit on the fly, or the human operators who have never flown a starship before this one? If you override the system and you're wrong, you could increase wear or miss a real hazard. If you obey it blindly and it's wrong, you could waste precious fuel or stress the ship unnecessarily. The first time this happens, the decision and its outcome will stick in everyone's mind. If the machines save you from a real threat, trust in automation goes up, maybe too much. If they trigger what later looks like an overreaction, skepticism rises. Either way, that first clash in year 1 cements the long-term balance between human judgment and algorithmic control. Remember the pattern here. By the end of year 1, you've learnt that at cruise you're effectively a high-energy projectile moving through a thin minefield, relying on shields that erode, fuel that can't be replaced, and navigation code that almost nobody fully understands. And you're collecting all of this data, these erosion curves and course constraints, At the same time, your communication delay with Earth is stretching from minutes to days. So what happens when you reach the point where you can no longer even ask Earth for advice in a useful time frame, and every navigation choice, every fuel trade, every "do we trust the black box" argument has to be settled entirely on board, with answers that will reach the people you left behind only days or weeks later, if at all? How useful is advice from home when every simple back and forth takes weeks? In your first year, you find out the hard way that calling Earth is turning into sending letters across centuries. Right after launch, your first messages home feel like slightly laggy calls. A few seconds of delay, then maybe a minute or two as you get farther out. It's annoying, but you can still have something that feels like a conversation. You talk, you wait, they answer, you react. You can argue, joke, comfort people almost in real time. Keep accelerating. As the months go by and you climb toward 1 to 2% of light speed, your distance from Earth expands fast. Light, the fastest thing there is, takes longer and longer to cross that gap. By the end of year one-way light time is several days. You send a message on Monday, it doesn't even arrive until later in the week. Their reply shows up the week after. You've gone from video chat to something closer to old sailing ship mail. You're living in a correspondence era again, except your delivery service is photons. You no longer say, "Hang on, let me ask my mum." You say, "If I send this now and she answers immediately, I might read it next week." At the same time, the pipe between you shrinks in another way: bandwidth. Early on, when you're still near the solar system, high-gain radio antennas or laser links can move a lot of data. Megabits per second are doable over a few astronomical units, as long as your pointing is extremely precise. As you get farther, that link stretches. Your signal spreads out. Even with huge dishes and tight beams, the effective data rate per person falls. Think of it like this: a whole city sharing one slow satellite internet link. Technically, it moves a lot of bits, but by the time you divide it across thousands of people, nobody is streaming in 4K. They're sending compressed clips, text, and the occasional big file that takes hours. Year one is when you feel that squeeze. The system that used to let you casually send full-resolution video of a birthday now tells you, keep it short, compress harder. A live feed of Earth news becomes a daily packet of headlines. Archived shows, education content, technical docs all get filtered and prioritized. Whole categories of communication switch from on-demand to maybe next downlink window. Information delay is not just about call quality, it changes how you understand events. Any serious news from Earth, good or bad, arrives with a built-in lag equal to your distance in light days. A big crisis might be over by the time you hear about it. A war could start and stop while your last message was still in flight. Scientific breakthroughs, new treatments, new technologies all reach you days, weeks, months after they were first used on Earth. In your first year, that really sinks in. You notice that jokes in family messages refer to memes or events you never saw. You get medical recommendations that are already slightly out of date by the time you read them. Your today is not there today. Your timelines have split. At some point you stop saying, "back home right now," and start saying, "back home when this was sent." The present is no longer a shared thing. This hits governance too, not just feelings. Before launch, the charter will probably say something like, "We will consult Earth on major strategic decisions for as long as practical." That sounds reasonable when light time is minutes. You can send a request, drink some water, wait and get feedback in the same shift. By the time you're a few light days out, that promise stops working. A simple question like, "Can we alter our mission parameters?" becomes a 2-week round trip even if everyone on both sides responds instantly. Real life is never that clean. People sleep, have meeting, argue. Those decisions stretch from weeks to months. Year one is when the culture on board begins to flip. Without a formal vote, practice shifts from ask Earth, then act, then maybe tell Earth later. You can't hold urgent choices hostage to delayed opinions. You have environmental alarms, medical crises, power trade-offs that need decisions in minutes or hours. Not in "we'll get a reply next Thursday." That doesn't mean you cut contact. You still send mission reports, technical questions, scientific data. Earth still answers when it can, but consultative government slowly becomes local government because physics makes remote control useless. While all this is happening at the strategic level, the same delay is tearing at your personal life. Distance turns grief into something weird and out of sync. A parent might die on Earth. The message about their illness could have been sent days ago, but you're only reading it now. Maybe they were already gone when your last cheerful video reached them. You're always a few beats behind the real timeline of the people you left. In the first year, those lagged messages come one after another. Someone's grandparent passes, someone's partner back home starts a new relationship. A sibling moves to another country. You grieve events that the people on Earth have already adapted to. Your tears come late in a different emotional season. After enough of those hits, your emotional centre of mass shifts. More of your real active relationships are with people you see in the corridors every day, people breathing the same recycled air. Earth contacts remain important, but they start to feel like letters from a previous chapter of your life, not from your current world. By the end of year 1, you live with a simple, harsh truth. You and Earth are no longer sharing a present. Not in physics, not in news, not in law, not in grief. You're two diverging timelines held together by a thin, delayed flow of photons. And while that flow keeps shrinking, one more thing is tightening even faster. The resource leash around your entire civilization. When you can't get real-time advice, can't ask for resupply, and can't even share the same now, every kilogram you launched with becomes permanent fate. So what happens in that first year when you finally look at the numbers, the energy budget, the spare parts count, the crop yields, and realise that on this ship, wealth is no longer money, it's mass, watts, and access, and you're already closer to the edge than you thought? How different does stuff feel when you know that every kilogram on the ship beat out something else to be there? In year 1, you stop seeing objects as cheap and start seeing them as decisions. Getting mass off Earth is expensive in physics terms before you even talk about money. To reach orbit, you need to hit about 7.8 kilometers per second, around 17,500 miles per hour. That speed costs energy, tens of megajoules per kilogram, no matter how efficient your launcher is. In present-day economics, that translates to thousands of dollars per kilogram to orbit, more to higher orbits, more again if you're sending it on an interstellar trajectory. For your generation ship, that means each kilogram of payload was a fight. 1 kilogram of extra oxygen tank might have displaced 1 kilogram of medical equipment. 1 more box of spare circuit boards might have meant 1 less box of books. A steel guitar or a set of physical photo albums might have pushed out some other comfort item. On Earth, you open a drawer and if the thing you want isn't there, you say, "I'll go buy one." On the ship in year 1, you open a drawer, or ask logistics. And when something is missing, you feel the shadow of that pre-launch trade-off. Somebody years ago looked at a spreadsheet and decided your missing item was not worth the mass. You are now living inside those choices, and mass is only half of it. The other half is energy. Your ship's main power might come from a fusion core, a fission reactor, or giant solar sails and arrays you used while still near the sun. Whatever the exact technology, at any given point you have a pretty fixed continuous output, maybe a few hundred megawatts that have to cover everything. Life support pulls its share for pumps, fans, scrubbers, heaters, coolers. Propulsion and navigation draw power, even at cruise, for attitude control, shield systems, sensors. Agriculture needs power for LEDs, pumps and environmental control. Computing eats watts. Entertainment, lighting, personal devices are on the same meter. On Earth, when a city grows or a new industry appears, you talk about building another power plant, adding another line. On the ship, there is no add another reactor without burning a lot of fuel and taking huge risks. In year 1, when real loads show up instead of design numbers, you find out where the gaps are. Maybe the hydroponic systems use 10% more power than planned because the LED efficiency isn't as good under ship conditions. Maybe life support needs more pump time to handle unexpected biofilm growth. Those extra megawatts have to come from somewhere. There is no slack grid waiting. Something else gets dialed down. non-critical lab time, lighting levels in common spaces, recreational equipment. Energy budgeting stops being an abstract engineering task. When the ship is under strain, who loses power first becomes a real question. In year one, when almost every system still needs tuning, you get more of those spikes and more of those hard choices. Then there's waste. On Earth, waste means you throw something away and forget it. On the ship, away doesn't exist. Every piece of trash, every broken item, every bit of packaging is a mass of atoms that took enormous effort to lift off Earth. If you can't loop it back into something useful, you're turning part of your limited stockpile into dead weight. That's why, from the ship's design point of view, waste is a failure mode. So you aim for obsessive recycling. Plastics get shredded and turned back into printer feedstock. Organic waste goes through digesters into fertilizer, biogas, or new biomaterials. Even low-grade heat from reactors and equipment gets captured to warm living areas or preheat process streams. Year one shows you where those loops really leak. Maybe some common plastic can't be reprocessed cleanly with the equipment you have, so it builds up in storage. Maybe a particular alloy in structural parts is difficult to reclaim, so broken pieces sit in bins as future resource with no real path back into circulation yet. Maybe crew habits create more mixed, contaminated trash than the recycling system can handle efficiently. You start seeing trash days not as a boring chore, but as performance reviews for the whole civilization. Every time a bag goes into a long-term storage bay instead of a recycler, it's a reminder that you're losing atoms you might need later. With stakes that high, do people just accept all the rules? Of course not. That's where the side channels begin. Anywhere resources are tight, informal economies appear. On submarines, people trade snacks, music, quiet favors. At Antarctic stations, people trade good coffee, warm clothing, or unofficial help with projects. On your ship, the scarce items aren't just chocolate bars. They might be extra kilowatt hours, access to restricted equipment, or space in the grow racks. Year one is when the first black market behaviors show up. Someone quietly reroutes a tiny bit of power to run an off-schedule coffee roaster or a personal 3D printer. A lab tech lets a friend use a restricted microscope or fabrication tool after hours in exchange for favors. A grower slips a few unauthorized plants into a corner of a rack, using ship nutrients and light for a private experiment or personal stash. These things start small. People want to see how rigid the allocation system really is, where the enforcement gaps are, but every leaked watt, every unlogged crop is still part of a closed budget. Leadership has to decide how hard to clamp down. Too hard, and you crush morale and push the behavior deeper underground. Too soft, and you get real distortions in power, water, and nutrient use. All of this reshapes what rich and poor even mean. Traditional money might still exist on board for some internal accounting, but it doesn't map cleanly to survival. You can't eat digital credits, you can't breathe coins. In a closed system like this, real wealth starts to look like three things: social capital, access rights, and discretionary energy or mass. The engineer who knows how to keep an aging pump running far beyond its rated life has leverage. The person in hydroponics who can consistently get 10% more yield out of a rack is valuable in a way no formal salary chart can measure. The medic with rare surgical skills, the coder who understands the navigation control stack, the tech who can repair a worn-out bearing with improvised tools, all carry practical power. Year one is when people start to notice this shift. Titles still matter, but informal respect clusters around those who can literally keep air breathable, water clean, food growing, and system stable. Access to critical systems, to decision-making rooms, to non-essential but morale-saving resources becomes a kind of currency. By the end of that first year, if you pay attention, you can already see the outlines of a new class structure forming, based not on bank accounts back on Earth, but on what you can do here, in this sealed world, with these specific machines and organisms. And once your resources, your time, your laws, and your social hierarchies have all been reshaped by this metal cylinder, one last change kicks in, maybe the deepest one. All of these grinding pressures don't just alter what you have or what you can do, they alter who you think you are. If there's no going back, and even your sense of time and wealth have been rewritten by the ship, then in year one, a bigger question quietly starts to grow. Are you still an Earthling on a long trip, or are you becoming something else entirely, a new kind of person whose true home is this artificial world, and whose story never includes a real planet again? How do you keep telling yourself you're going somewhere when you know you're going to die in transit? That's the identity crack that opens in year one. At launch, almost everyone still uses the word trip. A long trip, sure, but the same basic story. You depart, you travel, you arrive. You're an emigrant, not a permanent passenger. The ship feels like an airplane that just happens to take decades instead of hours. A generation ship quietly destroys that story. The basic facts are simple and brutal. You will never see the destination star up close. You won't walk under its light or stand on any planet it warms. You will live, age, and die inside this machine. At best, your grandchildren or great-grandchildren will arrive, or maybe it's just a future crew reading your logs and looking at your portrait in a hallway. In mission briefings, that's presented as a noble line, "We go so they can arrive." It sounds inspiring in a speech. Year one is when that line stops being a slogan and becomes a personal crisis for a lot of people. If you're not emigrating to a place in your own lifetime, what exactly are you doing? Are you a colonist or support staff for descendants you'll never meet? Are you living your life or feeding it into a project that only pays out after you're gone? That's when people start searching for new ways to explain their lives to themselves, and that's when new stories start to grow. Human cultures always build myths and narratives around their environment. Farming societies invent harvest festivals and stories about seasons. Seafarers created legends about the deep ocean, sea monsters, and guiding stars. Your environment now is a few hundred meters of rotating steel, LED sky, and constant machine noise. Your mind is going to try to make sense of that. Very early, probably in year one, you'll hear the first ship-specific legends. Jokes and half-serious stories about the engineers below who never see sunlight, even artificial, and keep the heart of the ship running. Ghost stories about someone who died during construction, or during the first leak, now haunting a particular maintenance tunnel. Quiet talk that the ship itself is more than a machine, that it's an ancestor or a guardian you owe respect to. Small things reinforce this. People give nicknames to modules and corridors. They talk about the spine or the heart instead of some dry structural code. They tell children simple stories that explain why the ship spins, why the stars don't move much, why you have to obey certain red lines on the floor. Year one plants those narrative seeds. Given enough time, those little explanations can harden into full-blown philosophies centered on the hull you live in. While those ideas form, there's another emotional layer nobody can skip. How do you feel about being the ones who left? Your first gen, the generation that stepped off the entire biosphere. Some people will feel intense pride about that. They made the cut, they volunteered, they were selected. They see themselves as pioneers, as the spearhead of human expansion. They'll wear mission patches, talk about honouring the sacrifice, and frame every hardship as proof they're strong enough. Others will carry a quieter, heavier mix of guilt and loss. They left aging parents, friends, whole ecosystems they loved. Rainforests, oceans, cities at night, mountains, all of that is gone for them personally. Studies of emigrant communities on Earth show the same patterns. Nostalgia, survivor guilt, idealised memories of the homeland. That's hard enough when you can still fly back for a visit someday. Here, you can't. Year one is when those emotions are least processed and most raw. Messages from Earth keep arriving, but now on a delay of days. You see your old street in a video, your family at a gathering, and your brain has to really accept that you chose to vanish from that timeline. Some people double down on pride to cover the guilt. Others sink into quiet grief. Both reactions will shape how they treat the mission and how they talk about Earth to anyone born later. Because soon there will be people on board who never set foot on a planet at all. Any shipborne children will grow up with totally different normal settings than you. For them, 0.5g spin gravity, LED, daylight, and knowing that all air and water are recycled will just be facts, not weird adjustments. They won't mourn real sunsets because they've never seen one. Earth to them will be a set of videos, stories, and maybe some soil samples in a lab. About as emotionally real as dinosaurs are to you. The way they see themselves will depend heavily on what you do in year one. Do you talk about Earth as home, as something holy you left behind? Do you treat launch day as a solemn memorial or as a victory celebration? Do you describe the mission as leaving a dying world or bringing life outward or running away? Do you name modules after terrestrial places or after ship heroes? All of that script writing starts in year one, mostly by accident. New parents will repeat the phrases they've heard in meetings and ceremonies. Teachers will use the stories you write now as classroom material later. You're not just passengers, you're founding mythmakers, whether you like it or not. And even as your values and stories shift, the actual words you use start to drift too. In a rotating habitat, arguments like, is this down or outward, are not just jokes. Some people will say they're going upstairs when they move toward the spin axis, and others will say inboard. If you step toward the hull, is that down, outboard, or something else? People in different sections might pick different terms. Closed communities always grow their own jargon. Think about how the internet slang changes in just 10 years on Earth. Now stretch that over a century, with no constant influx of new speakers from outside and constant pressure from a unique environment. Year one is when the first slang terms and in-jokes crystallize. Maybe you shorten centrifugal gravity into a clipped nickname. Maybe you invent a word for taking the long way around the ring to clear your head. Those tiny linguistic mutations, stacked over generations, will turn shipspeak into its own dialect. By the time your descendants get near the target star, they might need translation help to read unmodified 21st century English or any other Earth language. And their myths, values, and sense of us will be based on this hull, this journey, not on the blue planet they've never seen. So by the end of year one, your identity has been hit from every side. You've learned you're not on a trip with an arrival, you're part of a chain. You've started building new stories to make a metal world emotionally livable. You're wrestling with pride and guilt about leaving Earth. You're laying down the first layers of culture for children who will never share your memories. Even your language is starting to bend around the ship's geometry. All of that makes year one brutally hard. But it also leads to one more twist. If you survive it, if the ship holds, if the social fabric doesn't tear, something strange happens next. The second year doesn't feel easier because space got nicer. It feels easier because you started to adapt and the very things that tore at you in year one start to feel normal. That raises the last big question. After a year of fear, loss, and non-stop emergencies, what does normal even mean on a generation ship? And why does getting used to it make the whole situation both safer and much, much weirder? How do you know when the nightmare has stopped getting worse and has just become life? On a generation ship, that turning point usually hits somewhere around the end of year one. We can already see the pattern in places that are only weak previews of your situation. ISS crews, Antarctic winter rovers, sealed simulations like Mars 500. In almost all of them, stress is highest early. The first months are full of sleep problems, homesickness, conflicts, dizziness, weird health complaints. Then something strange happens. Between about month 6 and month 12, a lot of metrics start to flatten out. People stop feeling constantly motion sick. They learn the layout. They figure out how to sleep despite noise. Social groups form and harden. Tasks that felt insane at first start to feel like a job. They still miss home, they still have bad days, but the extreme spikes begin to smooth. Your ship is harsher, but your brain is still human. If you make it through year one without a major breakdown, without a system-killing failure, the odds go up that you'll be able to carry on. The abnormal starts to feel normal. The smell of filtered air, the constant hum of fans, the fake day-night cycle, the knowledge that Earth is days away at light speed, all of that fades into the background noise of how life is now. But that easing has a cost because you only get that new normal by filtering people and choices in a pretty ruthless way. Year 1 is a filter on bodies and minds. Some people will crack hard under the combined hit of isolation, weird gravity, health issues and social pressure. Maybe they fall into deep depression. Maybe their bones or ears react badly. Maybe they pick fights with everyone around them or start taking dangerous risks. On a true generation ship, there is no practical send them home option, but the system will still react. Some will be pulled off frontline duty, shifted to low-stress roles, given heavy medical support. Some might end up effectively isolated, watched closely because they are a danger to themselves or others. A few might die from illness, accident, or in the worst case, self-harm. By the start of Year 2, the group of people still doing the most demanding jobs, still on the key rosters, is no longer a random slice of humanity. It's skewed toward those who can cope with this environment. They tolerate confinement better. Their bodies handle the gravity and radiation better. They adapt to the social and sleep constraints better. That's not fair. It's just what survival pressure looks like in a closed system. In a quiet way, the ship has started selecting for a new kind of human, or at least a new kind of human profile. That effect will only amplify as generations pass. While that selection is happening on the human side, the machine side is doing something similar. The ship itself is moving from startup mode to steady state. In engineering, the most dangerous time for a big system is the commissioning phase. That's when you turn everything on under real loads and see what actually happens. That was your first year. Pumps failing early, unexpected leaks, software bugs, bad readings, fire drills that expose design flaws. By Year 2, you've patched a lot of that. The worst code bugs are gone. The flakiest boards have been replaced. You've measured which pumps are overstressed and adjusted their duty cycles. CO2 scrubbing parameters have been tuned based on real breathing patterns. Fire drills have been run enough times that people move on instinct. Farm failures have taught you where to put backups and sensors. The life support loop that felt like a fragile prototype at launch now feels more like infrastructure. Not invincible, but known. You've seen it fail in specific ways and recover. The maintenance routines are no longer guesses. They're based on actual wear, actual dirt, actual corrosion. That shift from everything is experimental to this is just how we do it isn't just technical, it's cultural. All the rules, rituals and norms you spent Year 1 arguing about start to harden in Year 2. Curfews, privacy expectations, how loud music can be, how strictly the gym schedule is enforced, how many kids each cohort is allowed to have, which holidays get official time off, what counts as serious misconduct. All of that starts being described not as the new policy, but as the way we've always done it. That's comforting. Humans like stable rules. Once things settle, daily life feels less like a constant negotiation, more like a routine. But it's also dangerous because bad decisions from the chaotic first months can get frozen into tradition. Maybe a harsh punishment introduced under panic becomes standard. Maybe a biased scheduling rule gets treated as natural law. By Year 2, you'll notice that people are more relaxed about the day-to-day, but much more resistant to changing foundational choices. The hardest fights over meaning, over direction, over what kind of ship is this, mostly happen in Year 1. By Year 2, you're living inside the results, and any attempt to rewrite them feels like an attack on stability itself. That leads to the last realization, and it's the one that stings the most. Getting through Year 1 doesn't mean the mission got easy, it just means the pain changed shape. In the first year, the questions are brutal and simple. Can we keep the air clean this week? Can we get everyone to sleep at all? Will the gravity system make people sick? Is the shield eroding too fast? Will someone snap and hurt someone else? Will we run out of this spare part before we can redesign around it? If you make it past that point, you've climbed the steepest part of the curve. The distance from Earth is already huge. The physiology shock has mostly hit. The system bugs have started to shake out. The first big social cries have happened. The ship is still dangerous, but it's less unknown. The stakes shift. Year 2 and beyond are less about do we make it to next month, and more about What kind of civilization are we turning into over the next 1,000 months? You're not just surviving anymore, you're setting patterns your great-grandchildren will live inside. Maybe that sounds like an improvement, but here's the twist. The first year on a generation ship is the hardest, not only because space is hostile, but because it's the only year when you still remember, in your bones, what not being on a generation ship felt like. By year 2, that memory starts to fade. Normal redefines itself. And once that happens, the most dangerous thing about the whole mission might not be the vacuum outside, the radiation, or the failing pumps. It might be how quickly humans can get used to almost anything, even being locked in a fragile metal world, forever between stars. This video is for educational or entertainment purposes only, and information provided in the video may be incorrect. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more such amazing videos.